Hi, everyone. Good day to everyone. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Secretariat and the co-chairs of the Working Group on Post 2020. I am Jyoti Mathur Philip, and I'm the Director for the Implementation Support Division, as well as leading the work in the Secretariat for the Post 2020. This webinar, as you may know, is part of a series of webinars that we're hosting together with the co-chairs of the open-ended working group on post-2020, the Global Biodiversity Framework, and the chairs of the subsidiary bodies, both SBSTA and SBI, to help parties and stakeholders prepare for the upcoming resumed meetings that will be held in Geneva from 14th to 29th March. We have held a first session of this webinar on 1st February and are holding this second session today to accommodate those who could not take part the first time. So, a few housekeeping points. Following the co-chair's presentation, we will have some time for a question and answer session. To ask a question, please type it in the question box. I will moderate your questions and address them to the co-chairs. Kindly be reminded that this is not a negotiation session, but an opportunity for you to seek clarification on the co-chair's reflections paper and on their presentation today. This session is being recorded and the recording will be posted on the CBD website. Well, one of the recordings will be posted on the CBD website, either the first or the second. Now, without further ado, may I hand over to Basil, who is representing the two co-chairs at this meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti, and good day to all of you. On behalf of Francis, co-chair, and myself, welcome to this webinar. Some of you may remember that we held a similar webinar when we released the first draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework last year. So we're delighted to be able to brief you once again. This time we will focus on the reflection document, which has been released on December 1 last year and can be accessed through the website. The goal of our session today is to familiarize yourself with the structure and content of the report. In doing so, we hope we will be able to assist you in your preparation for the resumed meeting of the working group in Geneva. This briefing will give us a chance to answer your question. We realize that you may have different views on different aspects of the framework. We must remind you that this is not a negotiation. Instead, this is a session in introducing the report itself and an opportunity to identify areas where we see common ground, those where further work is needed, and those where we may be reaching the agreement. I will now switch to presentation mode and give me a second here. So I click on the right button. And Jyoti may signal if they can see my screen. Thank you. So, colleagues, presentation, what you've asked us to do we all are asked to do is to find a realistic yet ambitious framework. And realistic means recognizing the socioeconomic reality and the development reality in each of our own countries. Yet ambition means enabling us to reach that vision of living in harmony. You ask us to do a science-based framework. This has to be a comprehensive framework that addresses all the drivers of biodiversity loss if we want to reach the vision. It is a framework for all, engaging the whole of government and in fact the whole of society. We're looking for synergies with the other convention, the other Rio Convention, moving from local to global level with a focus on project planning, reporting, and resourcing. And the idea will be to building on each other. There is in the Glasgow Declaration, you will see that on the slide, lots have been done to help us. What will we be able to bring to the UNFCCC in addition to ourselves at COP15? We should be learning from each other, and finally, the framework should be adequately funded in a timely manner. We will need to explore potential for additional financial opportunity for resource mobilization. The reflection document. So the purpose and the intent, and you'll hear that repeat that several times, is to support you and facilitate your preparation and your deliberation. We will building on area of convergence. We will be offering some initial ideas on how area of divergence may be resolved. This is not replacing draft one. Draft one and the report from the first part of the open-ended working group remain the official basis for the negotiation. We certainly hope that you will find this a useful document and it could be help in your deliberation. So this is in no way prescribing any text of our outcome. Keep in mind that the mandate you give us is to look at the proposal delivered at Working Group 2020 3.1, both in writing and in verbally. It is not reflecting any of the ideas that appeared since then. There were some really good ideas that have been shared with me, but our mandate was limited, and that's what we did. The structure of the document, part one is around the background scope, part two on the reflection of the overall structure and rationale, and we'll go through all that. 3 to 7 on the various elements of the framework. 8, the monitoring frameworks, and then finally part 9 on the draft decision. So without further ado, let's jump into it and let's look at some of the structural questions you've asked us. And we've seen 4 main questions. The first one on the value of the milestone. And when you will be looking at that question, keep in mind the following question. If you don't have milestone, how will we know collectively we're making progress? So that's something you want to keep in mind. Second one, some of you have suggested that targets would be better situated under specific goals. However, if you look at that, it is not very easy to make those one-to-one relationship in all cases. Third, some of you have questioned the value of numerical values in goals. Then if you remove those numerical value, you want to look at how will we know if we reach the vision. So in fact, what's the value of a goal without numerical value? And then finally, how will we look at the implementation time frame? How many cycles do we want up to 2050? How long those cycles should be? We started from the hypothesis of 10 years, but some may be 8 years and others 10 years. So we'll have to look at that. Now, moving to the next slide on the theory of change. You will be quite familiar with the part on the right, from the vision to the milestones and goals to the mission. What we're suggesting is it may be useful and valuable to add a couple of components. First, some further elaboration on the current status in terms of the ecosystem being degraded, human well-being jeopardized, equity of the sharing being of benefit not there, and insufficient resources. And then next to it on the left, a cut and paste from the best assessment in terms of the identification of direct and indirect drivers. So that's a simple representation of the theory of change. And if we move to the next slide, we'll see a slightly more elaborated version that captures the 21 targets grouped under reducing threats, people needs, tools and solutions for mainstreaming. We will go through them in details over the next few slides. But first, let's stop with a section that we are suggesting. When we prepared this reflection document, we could see there was a number of cross-cutting themes that could be repeated in many, many targets. in order to keep the structure simple, yet to give prominence to those issues and avoid repetition, we're suggesting it may be smart to capture there under implementation guidance. Terminology is a mirror of terminology used in the HE framework. There would be 7 in our proposal, and definitively realize that even if you accept this proposal, you may have discussion on what is under each of those 7 principles. The first one is the notion this is a framework for all. The second one is that notion around synergies with other conventions. The third one about a right-based framework, taking into consideration various groups like gender, youth, indigenous people, and local community. The fourth one is around the notion of human rights and its relation to the GBF, and the notion that there is different value system, especially in some countries, the notion of Mother Earth. Fifth one, integration of the 3 objectives of the convention. 6, the notion that the framework is based on the convention text and there is no need to quote individual article. And 7, the notion that adequate resources are necessary to have adequate ambition. Now, let's move to the goals and targets. In this first slide, you see on the right in the gray box what a quick summary of what we've put in the reflection document, and then on the left in the white box, the integral text of the goals and milestones as they are. At the bottom, there is a notice that milestones have not been formally discussed yet. We're looking forward to those discussions, if warranted, at the March session. But let's look at the reflection. If you look at goal A, there is 3 parts and 3 facets that are distinct but linked. There are some questions around the numerical aspect associated with each of those parts. There is question around the linkage to land and sea use strange drivers, and balancing comprehensiveness and simplicity. Keep in mind that in draft 0, we had 3 separate goals, and you ask us to come up with some language for integrating it. That's what we try to do with draft 1. So keep that in mind. I know there is a lot of people making work to simplify this language, and we're looking forward to those discussions. On goal B, should there be numerical aspect? Again, I am very pleased to see that there is a number of parties that are working hard to find better language to improve on goal B. So we're looking forward to that discussion. Moving to goal C and D. C talk about a substantial change. How do we want to define that? Should there be a numerical value attached to it? And D, how do we align the target with the milestone? And we'll be talking about that in target 18 and 19 a little bit further. And how can we put some addition to text that clarify some of those aspects on non-monetary aspect of that? Now moving on to the targets, and let's look together at target 1, 2, and 3. Target 1, as you know, is looking at land and sea use planning and the retention of wild space. Target 2 is around this restoration aspect, and target 3 is around the protection and conservation of 30%. In the reflection document, there is a few questions that we've noticed you ask us. On target 1, is 100% land use planning realistic and desirable? What's the extent of land use planning? What type of land use planning are we talking about? How does that relate to indigenous people and local community rights? Is there a notion that it will take more than 10 years to reach that land use planning if we are to respect fully IPLC rights? The second part of the targets on retention is retaining all wild space, realistic, and in fact desirable from a biodiversity perspective. On target 2, I know that there is a lot of discussion on the numerical aspect, both in terms of the format, should it be an absolute number or a percentage, and what that number should be. On target 3, we've noticed that there is question around the use of the language contribution to people or provision of ecosystem service. At the bottom of the slide, this is what Francis and myself attend are explaining some of the concept behind the 3 targets and pointing that it is not easy to add up the various targets. So you may be retaining 100% and you may be doing great progress on restoration, but you cannot add one-to-one what you're doing on restoration with protection. So it's important to keep that in mind. Moving on to the following target. Target 4 on the conservation of species. You ask us to consider whether domesticated species should also be taken into consideration in that target. Second, there was a lot of question around where do we put human-wildlife conflict? There is a broad consensus on the notion of human-wildlife conflict issue to be part of the GBF, but then there is question whether it belongs here or in other targets. And then finally, you ask us to be explicit about adding both in situ and ex situ conservation. 5, around the harvest, trade and use of wildlife, there was a lot of discussion, and you will see that in the reflection document, we're suggesting to turn around the wording, which may actually make it easier in terms of addressing unsustainable, unlawful, or unsafe use. 6, on invasive alien species, you are asking us to include adding identification of pathway and whether it would be useful to have numerical or qualitative aspect to those points. On 7, there is a lot of discussion around nutrients and pesticides. And we've tried to provide some definition in the glossary in terms of what's the difference between pesticides and biocides. And second, there was some question around the scientific basis of the numbers, and you will refer to the SBSTA document done a while ago about that. And then finally, some of you were asking about other pollutants like noise and light. Target 8 on climate change, there was a significant discussion around the use of nature-based solution versus ecosystem-based approach. And then second, there was question about the notion of having a numerical value associated with the contribution of ecosystem approach to the mitigation aspect. Moving on to the second group with how meeting people needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing. Grouping together here, target 9, which is focusing on the aspect related to species, target 10, which is around the use of ecosystem, and target 11 on the other services. Question around those targets is around whether we are grouping all the various aspects together or separating, where does the marine species belong on species or in ecosystem. On target 10, there was some question around whether it should be all or a portion of agriculture, aquaculture, and productivity, and forestry. And then second, whether the use of the word productivity was adequate in that context, or whether it can be replaced by other terminology like ecological intensification or sustainable intensification. And then finally, on target 11, there was some question around the NBS terminology. Target 12 is around the area and use of green and blue space by urban people, and you've asked some question around the area and quality or the access to those spaces, the wider health benefits, and whether urban sustainable development is linked there, and whether we should have one health. And then finally, whether the impact of urban sprawl on habitat fragmentation should be captured. Target 13 on the access and benefit sharing. Here a question, how do we make that complementary to goal C, avoiding any duplication, and whether that should be focused on Nagoya Protocol signatories or the whole of CBD. Now moving to the third part, And it is important to keep in mind the title, which is Tools and Solution for Implementation and Mainstreaming. And I'm underlying that last term. Target 14, 15, and 16 are belong together, with 14 focusing on action by regulatory bodies, governments, etc. 15 economic actors, and 16 on people. So on 14, you've asked us to focus on public authority, and clearly there was some question around how we characterize national accounts there, how we define values, and we try to clarify that in the proposal we gave you, and then the importance of the notion of financial flow or investment. 15 is focusing on economic actors and financial flow, and you clearly identify the need to make reference to the task force on nature, financial risk disclosure, and on circular economy. On target 16, you identify the notion of reducing and eliminating waste, and then moving from overconsumption to sustainable consumption. Target 17, which is addressing the negative impact of biotechnology. You ask us whether this should be focused on Cartagena Protocol signatory or the World of Convention, and whether we should be making a link to the positive aspects of biotechnology that are currently captured on target 9. And then finally, there were some interesting comments about the opportunity to move this target out of this third part into the second one on meeting people needs. The next block is around resources, and it's target 18 and 19, and they're the two sides of the same coin in a sense. On 18, it's about reducing the cost through elimination of negative incentive and subsidies, and 19, raising the resource available. What you ask us on the numerical aspect is what rate of decrease of the negative incentive and subsidies is possible? Do we need to capture the numerical aspect as cumulative amount over the period or as an annual rate at the end of the period? You've also asked us questions around understanding the concept of decreasing cost and negative incentive. And then clearly we understand now that there is not a one-to-one relationship in some case. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And then the definition of what is called most harmful. Under 19, again, better understanding the numerical aspect. How fast can we spend up, increase resource available in terms of availability, but also how fast can we increase spending in terms of ramping up capacity? Should we reverse the order of target 18 and 19? And how should we refer to the new financial instruments that are being put in place, such as the China Biodiversity Fund? At the bottom of the slide, you've seen that probably many times, is that curve trying to explain the notion of closing the gap over time and how in 2030 we will be at some point in the progress toward that end goal. Whether those numbers are the right one, I will direct you to the reports on the financial experts and the discussion we will have, but the notion is there. Now moving to the last part on this portion of the presentation. Clearly on target 20, you've talked about the notion of including traditional knowledge. On 21, numerical aspect. Now there is a number of other sections that are important. You've provided us with a number of new targets, and we've grouped them under that at the end of the section before moving to H. When we looked at them, we've provided you with some comments about the linkage with existing targets. We hope those will be useful to you and will guide you in the deliberation. Section H and I. The question there is what level of detail is needed in the GBF? What level of detail do you as party want in the GBF? Keeping in mind that at the end of the day, this is a framework for all, but I realize that there is a number of motivation for the level of detail, and we're looking forward to the deliberation. Section J on responsibility and transparency, same thing. We know that there is a question around the level of detail. We also provided you with a summary of the evolution over time of that section, as it went from many detail to very few, back to a lot, and to where it is now. Outreach, there was relatively few change requested there and comments. On the monitoring frameworks, again, we provided you with a summary of the change over time. Some of you may have been taking part in the workshop from SEPSTA, and we're looking forward to see more of your discussion on that. And then finally, the COP decision. We all know there was limited time for discussion, and frankly, we will be looking forward to the discussion at the resume section of Working Group 2020 3.2, when the rest of our discussion will be more advanced. Quick words on digital sequence information, a very important process. And one thing we continue to observe is while there is progress, there is still inconsistency in the understanding of the facts, and we're looking forward to see what we can do to address that. We want to thank the co-leads and the friends of the co-chairs who have made significant progress. This was an important piece of work. We know that the work is progressing in terms of acquiring capacity to do the analysis of the policy options. What we suggest we want to do at the resume session is a stock take, agreeing on where we are and the conclusion done so far, and then giving a mandate to continue the work as we progress toward COP15. We're gonna go as far as we can in terms of defining the solution, and we can determine the appropriate consideration of DSI in the GBF at the COP. So there is progress, it is continuing, but it's important in that case to move very carefully. A couple other considerations that you may find useful in terms of the relationship between the climate and nature. It was very interesting to read and see how the UNFCCC COP26 unfold, and to see in the language of the Climate Pact, the Glasgow Climate Pact, how it can contribute to the nature agenda, with the importance of restoring, conserving, and protecting nature and ecosystem, and phasing out inefficient fuel subsidies. So this is their contribution to us. Now it's time to ask us, what can we contribute to them? Should or could the UNCBD COP15 contribute to climate agenda? Could we look at the transformation of the agri-food system, particularly as a reduction of negative ad subsidy? This is a question for you, the parties, and you will consider. Then we'll move to COP27 and then UNCBD COP16. So each time we can contribute to the other. Second, and I won't bore you very much longer with all those graphics, but you've seen the so-called wedding cake of the SDG various targets, and you've seen in the past how our system is a major contributor to SDG 14, SDG 15, SDG 6, and in a way to SDG 13. But we are also contributing to a number of others, including hunger, education, and health. And we're also equally dependent totally on addressing on the SDG system to address indirect drivers like peace and decent work and economic growth. So wanted to leave that with you. So this completes my presentation. I have lost track a little bit of time, and I hope Jyoti is still smiling, which is the case, so I must not be doing too bad. So back to you, Jyoti.
Fantastic. Basil, actually, we've only taken up half an hour of this webinar so far, so that's very good. So now we would like to invite your questions based on the presentation from Basil on behalf of the co-chairs. Please be reminded that we will only take questions of clarification or understanding based on the co-chair's presentation or the report or the document itself. please type your questions into the question box. I will read a few out to Basil so that he can respond together, address them together. So our first question is from Gary Geller, and he says, agree that targets to goals is not a one-to-one relationship. Where are the targets mapped to the goals? I think we have been trying to do that, but hasn't happened and will not happen till I think the goals and targets are all agreed, but I will leave it to Basil to answer in more detail. May I give you another question?
Please.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is from Simone Lovera. It seems that the milestones for goal A are inconsistent with the goal itself, as milestone A1 talks about net gain, while the goal itself does not embrace the rather controversial concept of net biodiversity loss or gains. What is your view? And then I will ask you another comment from Simone. This might be a negotiation one, but I will ask you anyway and you can answer. There are quite a number of parties that have expressed support for freestanding gender target, a proposal that is broadly supported by major groups, and few, if any, parties oppose this. Why is the reflection paper so hesitant about a freestanding gender target? Over to you, Basil.
Thank you. And in no particular order. So I'll start with Gary's question about the mapping. So we've not done that, but probably a useful source of information about one mapping that exists is the one prepared by the group of expert scientists that was published recently. So perhaps somebody can put in the chat the web links to that, and what they have found, and there is no one-to-one relationship. There is many-to-many relationship. So I think this is an important perspective given to us by experts. So we'll look at that. On the second question around the relationship between the language of goal A and milestone A1. In the goal A, the first part is about we try to match the language. If we are not, there is maybe some shortcuts. But the idea was to move from a certain numerical value in 2050 to a smaller one, which will be a milestone along the way to that full result we're looking for. Now, parties will have discussion undoubtedly about both what is the right numerical aspect to measures and then what's the number to put in there. So we're providing you with those and we're looking forward to the discussion. And then the third one around gender, and it is indeed a negotiation, but maybe it's provided me with an opportunity to look at those. Standalone targets versus capturing issues that are cross-cutting and in fact could be in every target. I think gender should be perhaps reflected in every target. And that's why we went to that proposal of an overarching guidance in the front of the document ahead of the targets. So parties will have to look at that and they will have to look at the best way to characterize those cross-cutting issues. Is it in a principle that is upfront? Is it in a target that is combined with others? Is it in standalone targets? Those are very good questions. Thank you. Jyoti, back to you.
Thank you very much. I will continue with a question from Gary. In terms of detail in the GBF, would it be practical to make some reference to the very detailed 400-page UNSEEA document that unambiguously defines extent and condition, for example? I think because it's a 30-year framework. We're staying away from defining any, but I will let the co-chair respond. No, and then Gary continues. Just a personal comment. I found the UNCEA document to be excellent. Accountants cannot have ambiguity or overlap in their account definitions. We have a question from Yukiko Yokai, which says target 18 and 19 as the factual, logical, scientific basis for USD 500 billion and USD 200 billion is not sufficiently clear. How do you see the possibility of improving the clarity to make negotiations effective, efficient, and successful? This affects many aspects in the draft. I hope you have tried to clarify it in the reflections document, but over to you.
Thank you. And first, very good point to make reference to the UNSEEA. And in fact, if you turn to the monitoring framework, you will see many references to that. So I think at this point in time in discussion, parties have been quite comfortable with the reference being at that level. Now, if we can find places to have a reference also in the GBF, there may be no harm combining the statistics coming from the UN with the core business of the CBD, which is the data coming from the various monitoring network of biodiversity. And I do find this document very useful as well. On the targets 18 and 19 and our colleague Yukio, it is interesting to go back to the additional guidance provided to us by the resource mobilization experts. And there was a recent validation of those numbers that give us some really useful. And I encourage you to, perhaps we can put in the chat a reference to the recording of that briefing. That could be quite useful to colleagues. And perhaps that's going to give you the clarity you're looking for. Definitively, this is an important aspect. Back to you, Jyoti.
Thanks a lot. We have a question from Kirsty Leong regarding the mission statement. How can the GBF be successful without a mission that provides an overall global goal for nature, that sets a clear direction, generates alignment and accountability, and provides a rallying call for progress on nature? Have we seen the same mobilization against climate change without the overarching goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees? And then there is a question from Shiny Verghese. During presentation, there was a reference to contribution to people versus ecosystem services. I wondered the term services was used in error, since ecosystem services is about benefiting people. Perhaps you want to say contribution to peoples or contribution to ecosystem functions. Those are naturally happening in the ecosystem. The moment you use services, it is anthropocentered. Over to you, Basil.
Thank you. And first question about that notion of a motto or a rallying cry. I am not an expert on the history of the Paris Agreement or the climate, but my understanding is that, in fact, the identification by communication and media of the 1.5 degree came after the detail was negotiated. I know many people I've been looking for this single metrics that would be useful. Some are pushing the notion of some indexes, and And definitively, it is an attractive proposal to have a leitmotif or rallying cry that enable the marshalling of resources. At our level, in the bowel of the negotiation, what we're looking for is clear scientific and technical linkage between the numerical aspect of the targets and the goals. And biodiversity is a complex area where you need to look at many different facets of ecosystem and species, genetic diversities, and that's just one of the 3 objectives of the convention. So far, parties have not identified a single metrics like the 1.5 degree, but I'm sure if one emerge, we will be the first one cheering for it. Now, the second point from Chani Varghese on the language between nature-based solution, ecosystem-based service, and contribution to people. There is significant discussion and negotiation, and has been over time in the CBD. Perhaps it is best for parties to attach themselves to the outcome. What does it mean, and what makes a difference? I understand that there is a number of discussions taking place. It's going to be very interesting to see how the discussion on the definition of nature-based solution fares at UNEA 5 in a few days. And perhaps we can be informed by those discussions in terms of adapting the best possible language. For Francis and I, it's a matter of being practical and finding a terminology that enable us to move forward in terms of actual progress on meeting people needs and on conservation. Back to you, Jyoti.
Thank you so much. And that actually leads us to our last question. That was our last question. So I think we are keeping very good time until and unless anyone else wants to ask a question. But so far, no other questions. Okay. In that case, I want to thank you for your excellent and engaging and very important questions. And I hope we have been able to provide some clarity. And so we have come to the end of our webinar, and I would now like to invite the co-chair, Basil, on behalf of the co-chairs, to provide any closing remarks that you may have.
Thank you, Jyoti. And again, I want to underline that Francis would have liked to be here, and the challenge of time zone that you know more than this region, your region in Oceania and Asia know more than anybody else, know the challenge. Francis and I are quite confident that there is a lot of common ground and area of convergence that we can build on when we get together in Geneva. Very soon, starting tomorrow, we'll start to have the discussion on how we will be working together. And those will be the process by which we can talk about those areas where we are not together yet. Count on Francis and I to work with you to facilitate the compromise and to build bridge. So specifically, we'd like to remind you that tomorrow at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Montreal time, we will be convening briefing seminar together with the chair of SBI and SBI on the joint meeting agenda and organization of the work for the resume session. If you have not done yet, please register on the CBD website for either of those sections the session, and we're very much looking forward to your participation. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.